My family has owned a cattle farm just outside of town for over 100 years. It's been passed down from one to another ever since my great-great-grandfather homesteaded the land back in the late 18th century. The 40 acres of pasture, barns, and my little farmhouse may not look like much, but they mean everything to me. This farm is my income. So you can imagine how upset I was when I got a letter in the mail from the president of the local homeowner association, claiming that my cattle farm was under their control now. Apparently, some new wealthy development had been built right on the outskirts of town, and they decided to annex my farm into their association. I couldn't believe they thought they could just take over my family's land like that. I called up the homeowner association president right away to tell her there must be some mistake, but she assured me there was no mistake. My farm now fell under their rules since it was adjacent to the new neighborhood. She went on about how my messy farm would lower their property values and that I'd need to make some drastic changes. First off, she said I'd need to tear down the old wooden fences and replace them with nice decorative metal ones. Then I'd need to paint my barn, equipment, sheds, and farmhouse to match the color scheme of the development. But her biggest demand was that I get rid of my cattle. She claimed the cows were an unauthorized animals nuisance. I tried reasoning with her, explaining that I made my living off breeding and selling cattle. This farm had been raising cows for years, but she wouldn't budge. She told me I had 30 days to comply with the homeowner association covenants or face some hefty fines. Well, I wasn't about to let some entitled homeowner association president and rich neighbors drive me off my family's land, so I decided I would take them to court. I hired a good lawyer who helped me file an injunction against the homeowner association. We were able to get a court date set pretty quickly. The day of the hearing finally arrived. As I sat in the front row of the courtroom, I watched the homeowner association president and her lawyers file in. They were dressed in fancy suits and had an air of pride about them. When the judge came in, my lawyer presented our case first. He laid out the history of my family's farm and argued that the homeowner association had no legal right to enforce their rules on my property. He made the case that my farm predated the neighborhood, so it was not bound by their covenants. The homeowner association president testified next. She claimed that my cattle farm had become a nuisance problem that was ruining their perfect community. She even had some of the neighbors from her development get up and complain about the smell and sound of my cows. They made it seem like living next to my long-standing family farm was such an awful hardship for them. When it was my turn to speak, I told the judge about how this land and cattle business was my whole life. I explained how we had grazing rights to the creek that ran through my property, and if I got rid of my cows, then I'd lose my farm's main water source. Finally, the judge weighed in. He agreed with my lawyer, ruling that my family farm predated the homeowner association, so it was not under their jurisdiction. Their covenants only applied to the new development properties. He declared their annexation of my farm invalid. Those homeowner association folks didn't look too happy with his decision. As we left the courtroom, the homeowner association president came up to me angry. She threatened that this wasn't over, and she'd do everything she could to run me out. I told her to go right ahead and try this. Farm has survived droughts, floods, and more over the past century, so I think I can handle an angry homeowner association. I'm just glad I stood up for my rights and protected my family's history. My grandfather would be proud. This land has been in our family for generations, and no little homeowner association is going to take that away from us. The next one is a pro-revenge story. My dad died on December 1 Street 2022. He briefly lived with me before his passing. After a long stint of being chronically ill for the past 15+ years, as his health declined, he relied more on my mom for things. Prior to this, she was never a great person and fully took advantage of his disability and mobility issues as he declined for years. She claimed to be separated and divorced. Talking to other men on the internet, she made claims many times that she was going to move away and marry someone else. In addition, she took advantage of him financially. We tried every legal avenue we could find to have her kicked out, arrested, or forced her out. But those attempts were met with responses that it was a legal matter, and there was nothing that could be done. He made me durable authority and added me to all his accounts. This is a small portion of her abuse, but I promise her actions were no less than neglectful and selfish. I had tried for years to get my dad to move in with me, but he wasn't leaving the house he worked so hard to pay for. I brought him home on care the day after Thanksgiving and made sure his final days were the best they could be. After meeting with the funeral home to carry out his final wishes, I was told they required approval from my mother to allow me to cremate him. It was no surprise she initially told me no and only agreed after I allowed her to keep the Social Security survivor benefit, which would have been hers anyway. I wrote his obituary and left her out of it. There was not a single word or mention that he'd ever been married or had a spouse. I didn't feel she deserved to be recognized or viewed as a grieving widow when she spent their marriage as a terrible spouse and person. She lost her mind, and there were many questions from friends and family alike. I've spent years in therapy, working through toxic narcissistic abuse, and believe that if she didn't want me to talk about it, she shouldn't have done it. When people asked about it, I was honest about the years of abuse my father and I endured from her. I've completely ruined the public image and victim story she spent years creating. I might be the villain and in this scenario, but I do it again in a heartbeat. The next one is a funny revenge story. In high school, I was a senior and she was a junior. Tops of our classes, you know, standard, good kids. And I was like Wally Cleaver. Her family was very religious. Think of the Flanderses. While her folks were strict about her dating, they loved and trusted me and invited me over to their house frequently. It should be noted that all during the time we dated, we never had sex. Her folks had the talk with both of us and were concerned that their baby girl would end up pregnant. But I loved her enough to respect her folks' wishes and never made her uncomfortable. Had it played out right, I could have seen us being married. Fast forward to after my graduation. After a few months, we still lived in the same town, and she was to start in my college in the fall. She up and dumps me. Later, I heard that she'd been cheating on me, and he was going to take her to her senior prom. Even though we planned to do so, she told her folks I dumped her after finding someone else. Several months later, spot her and her mom shopping in the local grocery store. They don't see me. I had a hat and grew a nice beard and kept a safe distance. And I didn't want to get into a conversation with the mom, who obviously had been told I'd done her daughter wrong. So I waited until they left their cart unattended and placed a box of protection and gel in their buggy and covered them. When they got to the checkout and her mom started taking items out of the cart, she found them and promptly flipped out. It was like watching the mom and Carrie all the while the ex was. But those aren't mine. And the mom was, how long have you been having sex? Who is it with? And the shoppers around them snickering as hard as I was. Bonus, I went through my checkout fast and got to my car to watch the show continue. The mom was still fussing on the way to the car, and as they drove off, I could still see her wagging finger. The next one is a smart compliance story. This story randomly popped into my head. Not the most extreme example of MC, but it's a goofy little story some people might find funny. Also, apologies for the length. Brevity isn't my strong suit. I had a core group of friends in high school, but like a lot of people, our friend group had peripheral friends who would occasionally hang out with us. Abby was one of these peripheral friends. I never liked her. She got into a lot of trouble, and she was always really rude to me. We didn't have much interaction unless she needed something, usually homework help or lunch money. My friends and I usually ate lunch at a quiet stairwell that only a few people would walk up and down during the lunch period. Abby usually didn't join us, but on this particular day, she did. Near the end of lunch, a group of 3 girls walked down the stairs. I was talking to another friend at the time, so I missed what one of the girls said to Abby. But Abby responded by barking like a dog. The girl then turned around, said, "Did you really just do that to me?" And Abby barked once again. The girls turned around and stormed off, muttering to themselves at that point. The bell rang and I went to class. This seemed like such a non-thing to me at the time. I completely forgot about it after it happened. Cut to the next day. I'm in the middle of class when the principal's secretary comes into my classroom. Is you aggressive flamingo here? Mr. Potter needs to see her in his office. Now, I was a good kid. Never got in trouble. Never got a single detention. Never skipped a single class. So when I was called to the principal suffice, that started a bunch of whispers among my classmates. Even my teacher, as I was leaving, asked, "What did you do humiliating?" I go into Mr. Potter's office. He was an intimidating guy, a former college football player, always wore sunglasses, looked like he could rip your head off with his bare hands. Everyone was scared of this guy. I sat down across from his desk. He confirmed my name. Then he said, "I understand you witnessed a confrontation between Abby Johnson and Christina Smith yesterday." I said, "I know who Abby Johnson is, and I saw her yesterday, but I'm not sure who Christina Smith is." He already seemed bothered. Apparently, there was some sort of confrontation between Abby and Christina and two of her friends in the West Hall during lunch yesterday. I suddenly remembered what happened. Oh yeah, I did see that. I don't think I described it as much of a confrontation though. They ended up getting into a physical altercation. You don't think that's a confrontation? Me? Oh, I didn't realize a fight happened. I just saw them exchange a few words. The bell rang, and they went in separate directions. I went to class as soon as the bell rang, and didn't see anything beyond that. Okay, well, what did you see? I proceeded to describe what I mentioned above, including the barking, believe I said. And then Abby barked at Christina. Mr. Potter looked puzzled. Could you be more specific? What did she bark at? Her? Now, for the non-native English speakers who might not know this could also be a regional thing. I don't know. Barking is a word that can mean the sound a dog makes, but it can also just be a synonym for yelling. However, as nervous as I was in this moment, I completely forgot about the second meaning of it, which is what he was clearly thinking I was saying. So I responded, she was barking at her. He was clearly very frustrated at this point. His voice kept getting louder. I need you to be more specific. How was she barking? Me? You like a dog. I have no idea what you're talking about. Be more specific. Tell me exactly what she said. We can all see where this is going now. My high school was in a 250-year-old building with a lot of winding, echoey hallways. If your sneakers so much as squeaked on the floor in the main hall, you could hear it in a classroom down the hall and around the corner. Mr. Potter's office was in the main entryway, center of this hallway, and the door was open, since classes were in session and no one was walking the halls. At this point, I was annoyed. I was dragged out of class, embarrassed publicly, and now I was being yelled at for doing nothing wrong. Okay, let me demonstrate the barking, Mr. Potter. And bark I did. I started barking like a dog, as loud as I could. Mr. Potter jumped back in his chair a little and started going. I kept going. I had to give him the full example. Right. The woman working at the front office across the hall jogged over to see what was going on, but I kept going. Finally, Mr. Potter cut me off. Okay, you were clearly meaning literally barking. My apologies. You can go back to class. He wrote me a note, and I, very amused by myself, went back to my classroom. At lunch that day, while I was waiting to get food, I heard a random person behind me talking about the weird barking they heard while they were in class. That morning, apparently it brought their entire class to a stop for a few seconds. The next one is an annoying people story. This happened several years ago. I was a photographer for a major theme park and have dealt with my fair share of entitled Karens Brads. But there's only been one time I've had to call security because of a Karen. I was working with the character one afternoon, and one of the families that stopped by to pay a visit was this family of 3 with mom, dad, and a 5-year-old boy that I'll name Malcolm. Malcolm is strapped to a harness attached to mom's waist. Think those jogging harnesses for blind runners. To keep him close to mom and dad before the session, dad pulled the character attendant and me aside and alerted us that Malcolm was a non-verbal autistic and camera flashes were disturbing to him. Now, this was a pretty common request, so I adjusted my settings so I wouldn't have to use the flash and thanked him for alerting me. It's Malcolm's turn, and he was such a sweet child. He just wanted to show off the book full of pictures of his favorite dinosaurs, and we all got sad when he had to leave. A few hours later, I was in an area we refer to as backstage, where guests aren't allowed. Heading to my break. Imagine my surprise when all of a sudden I get body slammed by Malcolm. For the record, I'm almost 6 feet and 250 lb, and he nearly managed to knock me over. He's screaming and crying. Fortunately, my manager, Oscar, was nearby, so I flagged him down, and we immediately called security. We get Malcolm to a cool air-conditioned place, as it's 95 Fahrenheit. And I looked up pictures of dinosaurs on my phone to show Malcolm. Eventually, he calmed down, and he essentially became my little buddy. About 10 minutes later, Malcolm is reunited with a tearful mom and dad. It's there. We got the full story. Enter Karen. Mom, Dad and Malcolm were getting ice cream when Karen approached. The conversation went roughly as follows. Karen: why is he harnessed? Mamo: he's autistic, and he will bolt if he is not harnessed. Karen: no, he is not, Mom. Excuse me, Karen, you're just a terrible parent. My grandson knows better than to stray from me, and he's about the same age. Mom, I'm sorry, but he's incapable of understanding that it's safer for everyone if he is harnessed. It's at this point that Dad comes back with the ice cream, and Mom turns her attention away to help him. The next thing she knows, the harness goes slack. When she looked up, Malcolm and Karen are gone. It's so crowded that day that it's easy to lose track of someone, especially if it's a running child. An important thing to note is that the park has cameras everywhere, so it was easy to get a video of the incident and get a description of the Karen. Security was alerted, and Karen was tracked down. She was aggressive and tried to slap the security guard, who stopped her stupidly doing it in front of an officer. So she got a lovely court date for assault. As a result, Malcolm and his family were given an extra day added to their tickets as an apology for what happened. But they just had one request. They asked to know where I would be the next day so I could take their pictures the next day. I gave them a full-on photo shoot. And yes, it was the best day of my entire job. The next one is an entitled parent story. This story is so weird. When I 27F was 20 years old, I was in a relationship of friends with benefits situation with a guy now 40 meters. It was complicated. We were on and off for almost 5 years. He was always clear he wasn't ready for a relationship, and I was always clear I was madly in love with him. Every time I got tired of the situation and wanted to leave, somehow he convinced me to stay. Because love is free. We have so much time together, and he wasn't ready for commitment. I asked advice from my sister, now 42F, and she gave me some useless advice, like making him compromise, leaving stuff at his place, and basically turning him into a boyfriend until it was too late for him to say no. I never managed to do that because I wanted him to love me as much as I loved him, not trap him. During the last night I spent at his place, he said he wanted to try something more serious with me, talked about some dates he planned, etc., only to disappear forever. It was hard. This was the first person I loved, and he treated me like nothing. 6 months passed, and my sister came home. We both lived with our parents. She said she wanted to introduce her brand new boyfriend. She'd had a ton of boyfriends, but she said this was the one. It was a dinner only with my parents at our home, so I was excluded and expected to just go out or chill in my room. The day came, and while they were dining, I ordered a pizza. I came downstairs only to find the guy I was with 6 months prior dining with my parents and sister. I was shocked, but paid for my pizza and went to my room again to cry. After dinner was over, I confronted my sister in front of our parents and begged her not to be with him, to be loyal to me. Her little sister, there was no way she didn't know who he was. I had shown her pictures of him, his social media, where he worked, and she even knew where he lived. They never met because he didn't want to meet my family and never introduced his. But she knew who he was, and she excluded me from that dinner. Because she knew. She said they met by chance after we stopped seeing each other. She knew how hard that rupture was. She knew how painful it was to not have even closure. He just stopped replying, not even blocking me, just left me there wondering. After 5 years, she knew that during those 6 months, I was still hurting. I know it was my fault. I was too naive and thought that if I stayed long enough, he would be ready for the relationship I wanted and would learn to love me. Foolish, I know. She defended herself, saying it was a coincidence and chemistry was there. She loved him, and she wasn't going to lose the love of her life. This stuff only happens once in a lifetime. When I was in my early 20s, I would believe that. However, now I know that there are 8 billion people in this world. There's no one love of your life. You can find the love of your life multiple times if you look for it. My parents sided with her and said I should get over it since we never had a real relationship. 1.5 years had passed. I've been excluded from multiple family gatherings because he would be around. And my family thinks I will bring negativity since I'm still bitter about everything. I have no feelings for him, but I feel betrayed by my sisters and my parents. He is just poison in my eyes now. My sister is now 6 months pregnant. Due to her age, she had been extremely pampered by my parents. She still lives at home and is going to move in with him maybe 2 months after the baby is born. Then they're going to marry. In my culture, it is normal that if a woman gives birth, she moves back or stays with her mom. So the mom will help with the baby for the first months. A week ago, my sister's friends made a surprise baby shower. I happened to be at home. I tried to talk to them. I don't know why. Maybe because my sister and I were so close before, and I'm sad we're no longer friends. But her friends acted like I wasn't there, and only replied to me with yes, no, or silence, as if I was the one that created this mess, or I was a problem, or I tried to seduce my sister's man. I was planning to move already. I was saving money, etc. But after that I left immediately to a friend's house. I'm in the process of finding my own home. 2 days ago I received a call from my parents asking me to have a talk. I went to their house, and they informed me that the diamond earrings my grandma left me will be given to my sister. Those earrings have been in my family for generations. And before my grandma died, she said the earrings would be mine and my sister would receive a gold necklace. Grandma trusted my parents with the earrings. There was no will or anything. She just asked to give it to me when I was mature enough to appreciate and take care of a family heirloom. Now, parents think that since my sister is getting married first and is having grandma's first great-grandchild, my sister should have it. I'm really angry now. They're robbing me of something my grandma left to me. I don't think my parents are bad. I think they were too worried. My sister wouldn't marry due to her age. Again, in my culture, a single woman in her 40s is something to worry about for her family. And now that she's forming a family, they want to gift her with everything. But I was the closest to my grandma. She made it clear the earrings would be mine, not my sister's. Not the first one to marry or have a child, but mine. After 2 years of being excluded in favor of my sister, I gave the ultimatum to my parents. They give the earrings to me as my grandma intended, or I will cut them from my life forever. Not going to lie, the idea of cutting my family off is too painful. But I feel they already made me, and still make me so unimportant. I don't want them in my life anymore. I feel a little selfish fighting over this, but those are only things my granddad left to them. They are not owed to them.